129 men vanished. The witnesses were called liars. In 1854, a Scottish surveyor came home with a story he'd bought from the people of the Arctic. 2 ships gone, more than 100 men dead in the ice, and in their final days, some had eaten the bodies of the others. England did not thank him. England called the witnesses liars. It took 150 years to prove that almost every word they said was true. Start with what the record shows. In 1845, 2 Royal Navy ships left England to find a sea route across the top of the world. They carried 129 men, 3 years of food, and the confidence of an empire that believed the Arctic could be conquered by good discipline and better equipment. They were seen once more near the ice by whalers. Then nothing. A year passed with no word. Then a second year. This was normal at first. Ships in the Arctic were expected to vanish behind the ice for long stretches. But when the third winter closed in with still no letter, no whalers sighting, no trace, the silence stopped being normal. Somewhere in a place with no name on any chart, 129 men had simply stopped existing. So England went looking. What followed became one of the largest search efforts of its age. Ships sailed from the east and the west. Rewards were posted. Over the next decade, dozens of expeditions combed thousands of miles of frozen coastline for any sign of the missing men. They found almost nothing. A few graves, a scrap of a camp. The Arctic gave up its secrets slowly, and it did not give them up to the people who expected to be owed them. But one man took a different approach. He wasn't hunting for the ships. He was a surveyor mapping a distant stretch of coast, and he did something the great naval expeditions rarely bothered to do. He asked the people who actually lived there. The Inuit had crossed this land for generations. They knew the ice, the seasons, and the routes. And when he asked, they had a great deal to tell him. The Inuit described white men, dozens of them, dragging boats and sleds across the ice, growing weaker as they went. They described bodies found later along the route and camps where the dead lay unburied. Some told of men so starved that they had turned to the flesh of their fallen companions to survive. The surveyor wrote it all down carefully. He also collected objects the Inuit had recovered from these men. Silver forks, a medal, pieces that could only have come from the lost ships. He carried this testimony back to England. And here is where the story turns. He reported it honestly, including the part about starving men eating the dead. And that one detail poisoned everything. Victorian England could accept that its heroes had died. It could not accept that they had died like that. The witnesses became, in the public mind, not sources of truth, but savages spreading a slander against brave English sailors. One of the most celebrated writers of the age took up the cause publicly. In widely read essays, he tore into the surveyor's report. He argued that the Inuit could not be trusted, that they had likely invented the grim details, and hinted they might even have murdered the sailors themselves. It was a powerful, eloquent, and completely evidence-free attack, and it worked. The word of the people who had actually been there was buried under the outrage of a nation that refused to listen, but the ice kept its own records. A few years later, a search party on a remote Arctic island found a stone cairn. Inside was a single sheet of Navy paper, written in 2 parts. The first message, dated earlier, said all was well. Around its edges, written later in a different, hurried hand, was the truth. The ships had been trapped in the ice. The commander was dead. 24 men had already died, and the survivors were abandoning the ships to march south on foot. Look closely at that page, because it tells the whole tragedy in miniature. The calm center, written when things still seem survivable, and the desperate margins, scrawled when they no longer did. This single document confirmed the outline of what the Inuit had said. Men on foot, ships abandoned, a death march across the ice. The witnesses had been right about the shape of the disaster. And still, England chose to believe only the paper, not the people. Over the following decades, more evidence surfaced along the route the Inuit had described. Search parties and later researchers found skeletons scattered across the islands and shorelines, exactly where the testimony said the men had fallen. This was no longer rumor. These were the bones of the expedition, lying in the open, following a line of retreat that led south and never reached safety. The land itself was confirming the account, one grim discovery at a time. Then came the detail that England had found unforgivable. When modern researchers examined the bones under magnification, they found cut marks, clean, deliberate marks on the skeletons, made by knives in the precise pattern left when a body is stripped of its flesh. The forensic evidence was unambiguous. In their final starving days, some of these men had done exactly what the Inuit said they had done. The slander was not a slander. It was an eyewitness report. But forensics answered a second question too. Why had well-equipped men with years of supplies collapsed so quickly? The bones and tissue held high levels of lead. Their tinned food and possibly the ship's own water system had been slowly poisoning them. Lead damages judgment and the body alike. Picture it, 129 men, already freezing and starving, their minds and bodies failing from a poison they never saw coming. The disaster had begun long before the food ran out, so notice the pattern by now. The starvation, confirmed. The march on foot, confirmed. The bodies of the dead used to keep the living alive, confirmed by knife marks on bone. Every terrible thing the Inuit had reported was turning out to be accurate. And yet for generations, the public still treated their account as suspect, as if truth only counted when it came stamped on Navy paper or dug from the ground by outsiders. There was one piece still missing, the ships themselves. And here the Inuit had the last word. Their oral history had never lost the ships. Generations of elders had passed down where the vessels went down, describing one that sank in deeper water and another that settled in a shallow bay where masts once showed above the surface. For a century, searchers looked where the Navy's theories pointed. When modern teams finally set aside those theories and searched where the Inuit had always said to look, everything changed. In 2014, a survey vessel guided by that traditional knowledge found the first ship. It lay on the seafloor almost intact, upright in the cold water, its deck and timbers preserved by the very ice that had killed its crew. Divers moved through the silence of a wreck that had waited more than a century and a half to be found. It sat close to where the Inuit had always said one of the ships had gone down. 2 years later, in 2016, the second ship was found, and its location was the sharpest vindication of all. It rested in a shallow bay, the same kind of bay Inuit accounts had pointed to for generations, in an area named for those very stories. The vessel was so well preserved that dishes still sat on shelves and bottles stood upright in the galley. The ship had not been lost at all. It had only been lost to the people who refused to ask. Think about what that means. 2 ships found within a few years of each other, both sitting close to where the Inuit had said they would be. Bones marked exactly as the testimony described. Starvation and lead confirmed by science. Nearly every element of the account that Victorian England had dismissed as savage invention had turned out to be sober, accurate, first-hand history. The witnesses had never been wrong. The listeners had. So this was never only a story about lost ships. It's a story about a warning that was delivered clearly by people who had seen it with their own eyes and then ignored for 150 years because of who those people were. The Inuit told the truth from the very beginning. The tragedy is not just that 129 men died in the ice. It's how long the world chose not to hear the ones who could say what happened to them. The ships are found. The forensics are in. The oral histories are confirmed. There's no mystery left about what happened, only a lesson about who we choose to believe when the truth is hard to hear. That's this file, opened and closed. If you want more stories pulled straight from the record like this one, subscribe and stay. And tell me one thing before you go. When the witness and the Empire disagreed, whose word would you have trusted? The paper or the people?